Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in to the Cloud Native Islamabad YouTube channel. My name is Saim Safdar. I'm your co-host today for the Kubernetes virtual birthday. I actually encountered Kubernetes in 2017, and I think 2018 or 2019, I'll actually join the KubeCon virtually as some of the talk there, and that's where my long-lasted journey of till today, Kubernetes has started. And recently, Kubernetes is one of the largest open source project to date, with 88,000 contributors from around the world, from more than 8,000 companies and across 44 countries. This is arguably the most largest project, and its ecosystem is quite huge, and the people working in there incredibly valuable. And we'd love to talk about their journey today, how they got introduced to this ecosystem and the Kubernetes. So I introduce my guest one by one. Thank you very much for joining, Caslin Field. You are on the screen now. Share a bit about yourself today.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Saim. I am a CNCF ambassador, as are you. I'm also a developer advocate for open source Kubernetes and GKE at Google. I am also a co-host of the Kubernetes podcast from Google. And I am a co-chair of the special interest group for contributor experience in open source Kubernetes.
Thank you very much, Caslin, for your introduction. So next up, Adrian Mout. Over to you, Adrian.
Hi there. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm Adrian. Excuse me. I'm a DevRel or technical community advocate at ChainGuard. I'm also a Docker captain. I help run the Kubernetes and Cloud Native Edinburgh meetup alongside Nick Jones, who's a CNCF ambassador. I'm a Docker captain. Did I say that? So.
Very much, Adrian, for joining. Next up, Courtney Nickerson. Over to you, Courtney.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Saim. It's fantastic to be back with this community. You know how much I love everyone in the Islamabad community. So my name is Courtney Nickerson. I am currently a DevRel for KubeShop, working on the TestCube project. I help organize the CNCF Bilbao meetups, and I'm also a CVO ambassador, which is super fun to be. It's a great group of people. And yeah, it's super excited to be talking about Kubernetes today and celebrate the KuberTENes birthday.
Thanks, Courtney. And our next up, Ingen Deary. Over to you, Ingen. Can you introduce yourself today?
Yes, of course. My name is Ingen Deary. I'm working at Pulumi as a customer experience architect. I recently switched sides. So before 2022, when I joined Pulumi, working in the industry, I was end user. So working in big enterprises, German enterprises, and consuming Kubernetes. And that was very interesting then to switch and also see, let me say, behind the scene and how things are working. Very interesting. And I'm excited here to talk with you folks.
Thank you very much, Ingen. And Adriana. Adriana, can you hear us? Can you introduce yourself?
Hey, my name is Adriana Vilela. I am based out of Toronto, Canada. I am a senior staff developer advocate at ServiceNow Cloud Observability. You might have heard of us previously as Lightstep. So I'm a CNCF ambassador, a HashiCorp ambassador. I've got a podcast called Geeking Out. And I spend most of my time doing advocacy around observability, and particularly in OpenTelemetry. So I'm very active in OpenTelemetry. I'm one of the maintainers of the OpenTelemetry end user SIG.
Thank you very much, Adriana, for your introduction. And next up, Atul, one of the guys who live very closer to me. And over to you, Atul. Can you introduce yourself now?
Yes, hey Sam, hey everyone. First of all, thanks Sam for having me here. It's pretty good to be here with the amazing folks around here. Also, I would like to say that I'm probably the newest entrant in the community talking about open source and Kubernetes, because it was just 3 years back that I was introduced to everything open source and Kubernetes. So I work as a senior developer advocate at InfraCloud, where I help developers, organizations, adopt open source technologies. I'm also a CNCF ambassador, and that's one of the great things that happened, which enabled me to meet such a vibrant community. Also, the part of the platforms working group and doing quite a few things around platform engineering as well. And yeah, I got this party hat for today's KuberTENes meetup.
Awesome, wonderful, wonderful. We have one more guest, Bill Mulligan. So I sent him. I hope he will be joined in a few minutes. So looking forward to chatting with him as well. But let's start. I started with a Caslin. He's one of the most active in the community for a very long time. He writes some documents on how to write a KubeCon CFP, and he was one of the leading forces on encouraging people around the globe to actually participate in the CNCF ambassador program and bunch of so many other things I can spoke about today. But I wanted to learn from you today, Caslin, how you got introduced into the Kubernetes and what motivated you to do all these super incredible work for all the community members we have. So over to you. Tell us your journey to being in, how you actually get introduced to the Kubernetes.
Well, thank you very much for saying all of that. I appreciate it greatly. So exciting to hear that work appreciated. But I actually got into the community thanks to a mentor of mine. So in my first job out of college, I ended up at a company called NetApp, which is a storage company. And at NetApp, this was back in the days of physical offices. And I sat in the office in this very open area. There was this one part of the building where they had taken down all of the walls between the cubicles, and all the folks there were like really close and talked to each other a lot, even though they were all on different teams. So I joined and sat in that area. And one of the folks there, Jonathan Rippey, was a fantastic mentor to me. A bunch of them were fantastic mentors to me, but Rippey in particular was excited about containers, and he wanted to tell everybody that he could about how awesome containers were and how they were going to change the world. And this was in 2014. So it was right at the beginning of Docker. And I was new. I had just graduated college. So if you want to tell me about this new technology, sure, I'm here to learn. And so he started teaching me about containers, and we started kind of diving into that space. And I just got super excited about it, just like he was. When someone's really passionate about something, it's really easy to catch it, isn't it? And so I started attending events like DockerCons, and started trying to understand meetups, and just started getting involved in the community. I didn't really become a Kubernetes contributor until like 2020, like 6 years later. But I started to get excited about it, and that's how it all began. And now my cat wants to say hello. This is Alita.
Oh, hello. Yes, and just three question for you, because I think a lot of the folks asking me, because I am one of the person who have actually never attended the KubeCon. All of the rest of the folks are, and I wanted to learn all of you from. So what is your favorite KubeCon places? Number one, what are your favorite KubeCon places till today? And then what is your favorite KubeCon talk and some of the favorite open source project within the CNCF landscape?
Interesting. All right, let's see what I can come up with. So for location, I've been to KubeCon EUs and KubeCon NAs. I've never been to a KubeCon Hong Kong, which is now moving to Shanghai this year, and obviously never in India, because that's happening for the first time this year. So in the KubeCons that I've been to, I would say that my favorite locations are probably Barcelona for EU. And for North America, I think my favorite location was probably Austin, actually.
Great. And then your favorite KubeCon talk?
Ooh, favorite talks. That's a tough one. If keynotes count, I love keynotes. I always try to make the keynotes, and I live tweet them. There was a talk that Tim Hawkins gave at KubeCon Chicago about, and Tim Hawkins been around since the very, very early days of the project, when it was still within Google before it was even announced publicly. And he gave this talk about the 10-year anniversary, about how far we've come and where we're going next. And that one was really wonderful. So I would highly recommend that one. There was also one that I was talking to folks about recently. That was a breakout session led by, I know Ian Coldwater was in it, and Kat Cosgrove. I think that it was just the two of them, and it was about deprecations in Kubernetes. So my lightning talk for you all today is going to be about some of the new stuff has been released in recent Kubernetes versions, and they talk about some of the challenges of communicating changes to Kubernetes to the community, and how that can go wrong. So that's another really good one.
Yes. And final, what are your favorite? There are a lot. Oh my God, there are so many of them. So choosing few of them might be quite tricky. But which one we actually use often, or which one you find more interesting in the last few years?
I feel like I'm probably pretty lame on this. I mean, obviously my favorite is going to be Kubernetes. That is the one that I am deeply involved with as a contributor. Beyond that, I'd say the next CNCF project that I've probably used the most is Prometheus and Grafana. I really do like the combination of Prometheus and Grafana for observability in open source. So that would definitely be another favorite. Beyond that, I'm not sure. Kubernetes, Prometheus, and Grafana, though. Check those out.
Awesome. So I have counted my one vote for Prometheus and Grafana. Let's see how many votes more we get today from these three open source projects. So over to Adrian. So Adrian is a Docker captain, done some wonderful community work for in the container ecosystem quite heavily. And then now he's currently a part of the ChainGuard team that actually been helping a lot of organization on making so the minimal images of the actually go into the productions without having so many vulnerabilities in it. And he's working on some of the very cool projects today. So Adrian, over to you, your journey into the Kubernetes or in the container ecosystem, and some of your favorite places and favorite projects and all these kind of stuff. Over to you now.
Cool. So yeah, it's kind of making me feel old because I was, I was already into my career and writing software. And what happened was I was doing some contracting work in the Netherlands. So I'm based in Scotland, UK, but at that time I was working with a company in Amsterdam, and it was a very small company. And Docker came out, and Penny Resnick, who I think some of you probably know, was the CTO, became CTO of Container Solutions, but he found Docker and introduced me to Docker, and introduced a few other people and set up the Docker meetup in Amsterdam, which is one of the first meetups alongside Mark Coleman. And yeah, I went on to do a lot of work with Container Solutions, and I worked for them for a while with Jamie Dobson and Penny. But at the start, I was just contracting. And the reason was I was also writing a book on Docker. So I wrote one of the first books for O'Reilly on Docker, which was a lot of fun. And in that, I had a chapter on Kubernetes. And I actually, one of the most read things I ever did was back in 2014. I did an article comparing Kubernetes, Swarm, and Mesos. Because at the time, it really wasn't clear that Kubernetes was going to be the runaway leader here, but that was how it turned out. But yeah, I've been involved with events in the community for basically all that time. So I think I've been to all the KubeCon EUs. There was the first one in London, which was actually, I think the CNCF, that one wasn't run by the CNCF. They then took it on after that in a KubeCon EU. So that was an interesting one in London. And I think I've been to all the ones. They kind of also get confused with DockerCon, because DockerCon and KubeCon were both pretty big at the time. But yeah, what are my favorite ones? Definitely Barcelona, as Guzlin mentioned. I think Copenhagen was pretty good. I seem to remember that one. But they do kind of merge a bit. I'm sure there was one in Berlin as well, Amsterdam recently. I've been to much less in the US. I've been to a couple recently. I enjoyed both Detroit and Chicago quite a lot, to be honest. They're both fantastic cities to visit. Talks. So there've been a lot of great talks, especially at the early KubeCons. And the early KubeCons, I went to a lot of talks because I was trying to get ahead of all of this. I have to admit, nowadays I go to less talks and do more talking to other people. But that being said, I think everybody's going to like say the same names, I have to say. But both Kelsey Hightower and Liz Rice give fantastic talks. And they've given some great keynotes and also standalone talks. I was trying to remember the event where Kelsey gave a famous Tetris talk and he compared Kubernetes to Tetris. That was a really good talk. And Liz Rice had a fantastic talk about building a container runtime from scratch. That's a really interesting talk. That's worth looking up if you have the time. What were the other questions, Simon?
Yes, just a final one. What are your favorite open source projects within the CNCF landscape? And you work very often on these projects.
Yeah, honestly, I'm starting to forget which ones are in the CNCF and which ones aren't. So I'm worried I'll say something wrong now. Do you know one thing I think that deserves a shout out is the GitOps movement. So
Yes.
I was quite sad when Weaveworks shut down, but Alexis and all the people from Weave came up with the GitOps concept. So both Flux, which we've developed, and Argo CD kind of exemplify that, which is where you keep your state in Git, and basically you control the cluster by doing updates to Git, so everything's sort of synchronized. And I thought that was quite a big important concept. So I'll probably pick those two projects.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian, for sharing all this wonderful information. And you spoke about Liz Rice and Kelsey Hightower. So I switched to another person who joined just quite recently, and he has been fortunate enough to work with Liz Rice on a very consistent basis, some of the eBPF side, on the Cilium side, and that. So over to you, Bill. You joined late, but first up, you some introduction, and just give us some your cool KubeCon places, how you get introduced to the Kubernetes, your favorite open source projects, and some of your favorite KubeCon talk as well. So over to you, Bill.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Bill Mulligan. I work at Isovalent. I'm a maintainer of the Cilium project, which is a graduated project in the CNCF. I've been going to, I think I counted it as 15 KubeCons now. So like quite a few now. I was talking with Katie from the CNCF events team, and she really wants to put together a list rather than who's been to like the most KubeCons. So hopefully I'll see my name somewhere up there towards the top. Obviously my favorite project has to be Cilium because I'm working on that one full time, but obviously that's extremely biased. And we're doing a lot of stuff around like cloud native networking, and then observability of the network, and then also providing security around that too. And I guess with all the kind of buzz around eBPF, all the projects are really growing right now, which is really fun to be a part of.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like there are some, because you mentioned you enjoy almost all of the KubeCon as well. And for this question is so much valid for you. So if you can pick 2-3 KubeCon best talks, so what are those? Or even, I think you have given your own talks as well on various different places as well. So what are your own favorite personal talks that you give into the KubeCon some places?
My own favorite talk. I feel like this is like shameless self-promotion, but I think the one that I did with Divya about the 10 biggest mistakes you shouldn't make in open source has to be one of my favorite ones. It was just kind of like telling different stories of what had happened over our careers in open source, which is quite fun. And then favorite KubeCon talks, I think I'd have to agree with Adrian. A lot of the Kelsey Hightower ones. Like I remember being in the sponsor showcase, and like Kelsey's talk came on, and they were like kind of like showing a live stream on it, and like the whole like conference room like went over to like watch his talk. And that was the one about how to become a 10x developer. And that was also a really, really good one. Other than that, like honestly, I don't go to that many talks. I'm usually hanging out either at the Cilium booth or in the hallway. So I like to catch up with them afterwards.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Bill, for all sharing all of these kind of stuff. So I will move into the infrastructure side of things. We go to the security umbrella, go to the networking. Now we go to the infrastructure side. So Ingden, you actually go into the KubeCon as well, and also you being into the case studies on a lot of the different case studies. And this year, I think I literally forget to miss like which of the case study you have missed. So which of few of them you actually have missed. So you have been very active in this ecosystem as well. So first I wanted to learn from you today is how you get introduced into the Kubernetes, which year was in, what is the problem you are solving on that point that actually ended up landing your search into the Kubernetes, and then you recently be a part of the community, going there, watching talks in the KubeCon and some of the favorite open source project. So over to you, Ingen. Can you share some enlightening as to your wonderful story in the Kubernetes?
Okay, can do. Yeah, actually, I landed very late into the whole Kubernetes game because apparently that's what end users always do. That's the reason we need developer advocates to enable the people. So we started in 2017 because when you have a strong operation team with a bias, and at this time it was virtual machines and you order them, they are hand created via ServiceNow or whatever boring system you can imagine. So that's the thing. And Docker and all the stuff was always seen as something developer do on their local stuff and so on. So never really catched up on this. But somehow I managed to get 5 Unix machines or Linux machines, and I could install Docker Swarm on it and started to create our first microservice architecture on top of it. And that was the starting point for the operations team in the company to think about, because they don't want to run a Docker Swarm, how do you say this, underground Docker Swarm infrastructure, and then waking up at 3 o'clock because some important services are not running. And it gives the start for the story. And then we evaluated different solutions and landed then on a Red Hat OpenShift at this time, because it gave the best experience at this time to have OpenShift on your machines, not only for the operational teams, because everything was set up via Ansible and so on, but also for us as end users, because it gave us this serverless experience. We did not have to take care about how many nodes are running or whatever. We could order our namespace and then just work on this. And things become much, much better with later versions, having then access to operators and so on. So the ecosystem start to grow. So that was around 2017. Had a short evaluation of Rancher at this time. It was also crazy because they run it inside containers to create a Kubernetes inside containers. So it was really, really the Wild West of this. And I'm happy that Kubernetes is now a commodity and people see this much differently than before. So yeah. Regarding your question, which location or which KubeCon, I will disconnect this now from the cities, because all the cities are great, and I would be very, very harsh if I say this one is better and so on. So the cities were all great. Again, I did not visit so many, so my stuff started during Valencia. So but I still would say I liked KubeCon Paris a lot. That was really, really nice. But from the perfect case, because it was my first KubeCon with Pulumi, was Amsterdam. And that's one of the reasons why they announced now to come back to Amsterdam, because I think Amsterdam was the sweet spot of nice city and nice location. So I think it's really, really cool. So I'm looking forward that you also may have the chance to visit then the next KubeCon in Amsterdam, Europe, for example. So that's on a short thing. For the talks, I agree with Adrian and Bill. Every time when I go for a KubeCon, it's mostly via Pulumi and having also a booth. So that's the hallway track is for me very important. And if I go for a KubeCon, for example, Chicago, I went on my own. I still went for the hallway track because that's very, very interesting to see the people, talk with the people, understand more about the usage. And if I join a talk, I prefer everything. So I go to the big speakers who know, hey, they deliver very good stuff, but also to some underground people, like, I don't know this person, where it's coming from an end user, and then sometimes you get this jam of a talk and you're like, wow, that's interesting. The creativity to fit a project into this space, amazing. So feel free to go to all talks. And then I also watch them on YouTube afterwards. So I'm one of this rare person who keep on watching the stuff because I miss some of the stuff. And projects, they are changing because it depends of the customers, but some of my all-time favorite, Kubernetes is one of them. Currently, I love Backstage very much. They're doing really, really great. If I think about how they started, everybody's like, I need to clone it and I need to fiddle in the code. I'm not a front-end developer. And to the state they are now, that's very, very cool. And everybody tried to compete with them. Argo, I mean, it's a hate-love relationship. Sometimes I hate it, but then I love it because the UI, it's really depends on my mood. That's one of the things I think, that's the three I would count now. But again, there are much, much more projects, and every day something new is coming.
Thanks, Injin, for sharing all these details. It's been wonderful to hearing about these projects, these KubeCon talks. There are some of our friends in our KubeCon in the chat. Mourinho is saying, hey, wish I could stay for the entire thing, but I will be streaming for the Kubernetes. His name spec, I think he have a workshop. And he's saying, happy Kubernetes, and we are celebrating in Toronto this evening. Best of luck, Mourinho. And then Sonali is saying, happy KuberTENes. Thank you very much for joining. So it's been some inspiring stories with, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're remaining with 3 more guests. And I will go to Courtney. So tell us about, because today we mentioned KubeCon Barcelona, and he's from that city, that places. So he will have some experience. So over to you, Courtney. Tell us about how you got introduced to the Kubernetes and the rest of the things.
Yeah, great. It's actually really fun to hear people say that their favorite KubeCons were Barcelona, Valencia. Since I live in Spain, it's my adopted home, so it's very cool to hear people come here and have such a great time. In terms of me and getting introduced to Kubernetes, it was kind of an off thing. I started working for a DevSecOps startup. It was an application security tool it was an agent that deployed wherever your applications were. And I was actually working in sales and marketing at the time. I now do DevRel, which was quite the leap as years passed. But I was working in sales and marketing and trying to understand what our clients were doing and where they were headed. And all of a sudden in 2020, we started to see a lot more people who were interested in our tool because they were migrating to Kubernetes. And so I started to do a deep dive and thought, oh, wow, this is interesting. There's so much to learn. And I love having new things to learn and just kept learning more and more, and then got started helping my friend Bart with the Data on Kubernetes community at that time, and just kept learning things by writing their newsletter, and then started playing around with a virtual machine and tried to set up a Docker file, and now here we are. So it's been not your average journey, I guess, into the Kubernetes space, but it's been a fun one nonetheless, and huge shout out to the community of Kubernetes users and the CNCF community specifically, because without the people in this community who are just open arms to somebody like myself with zero technical background, and spent so much time just explaining things to me. And I'd say, can you explain it to me like I'm grandma? Can you explain it to me like a 5-year-old? And people do, right? And they still do. They continue to do so. And it's such a fantastic place to be. But unlike Bill, I have not been to 15 KubeCons. I've been to 2 in the US and 2 in Europe. And although I am from the US, my favorites are the European KubeCons. They just have such a vibe. People are, especially Americans who come, it's like they're in semi-work holidays and just having a great time. But Amsterdam and Paris, for me, they were both fantastic events. My first KubeCon was Detroit, and it does hold a special place for me because I was just getting started in this space, and I met so many people that I truly was geeking out about meeting after following them on Twitter and LinkedIn and learning so many things in Slack from them. To meet them in person and be able to thank them was super special. But the vibe that goes on at KubeCon EU events is just really cool. So those are my favorite events.
Yes, absolutely. And Courtney, can you shout out some of your favorite CNCF open source projects and some of your favorite?
Yeah, absolutely. So huge shout out to Keda. I think it's a very cool project. The whole event-driven autoscaler. Also, I have a very good friend, Jorge, who maintains that project, and he was so kind to explain it to me. And then I went, "Wow, this is so cool!" So I think Keda it's a very cool project and super useful. And I think there's so many people who are actually using it, and they just don't actually talk about it much. But that kind of just speaks to how good it actually is. People don't need to be talking about it. They don't have questions about it. They get into it and it just works. So I think it's a very cool project. I was also very sad to see the whole Weaveworks thing. I'm a big fan of Flux. I think a lot of people are big fans of Flux. It's the overlays are fantastic. I do also think you can use them in combination. I'm not just a Flux lover, but I love that project. And then obviously I started off in security, so Cilium it's what I geek out on. That's how I fell in love with tech, was security. So I geek out on security stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Courtney, for sharing all these details. And I go to the Adriana, and because one of the projects that I will see a lot of the organization, even they know about ecosystem, Kubernetes or not, but they're the heavy user of Prometheus, Grafana, OpenTelemetry, these kind of the tools I've been seeing is populated a lot of the different places in the production angle. And Adriana has been in this space quite involved for a very long time. And I wanted to learn from you how you get introduced to this ecosystem and how end up in the observability space and a bunch of your favorite KubeCon moments and talks and your personal some favorite memories.
Yeah, sure. So I have been working in tech for over 20 years, but I have only spent the last 2 years of my career actually contributing to open source, which is bananas when you think about it. And my first introduction to Kubernetes was actually, I was working at a bank, big DevOps transformation project, and they were using OpenShift. So that was like my first introduction to Kubernetes was via OpenShift when they had transitioned to like using Kubernetes under the covers in OpenShift. And so after I moved to another job as a release engineer, and they were exploring the use of Kubernetes, and I'm like, I know OpenShift. How hard can Kubernetes be? And then I'm like, oh crap. There's a lot of abstractions that happen in OpenShift. And so it was quite the lesson in really like it was a great lesson because it made me realize, wow, there's like a lot of things that happen behind the scenes in Kubernetes that OpenShift just sort of like takes care of for you. So that's how I got into the Kubernetes space, and as in this job on a release engineering team, I was like the only person with any Kubernetes like experience, and I started exploring Argo CD. So when I started writing my blog on Medium back in 2020, it was like a bunch of explorations of Argo CD, which was tons of fun. And then I got into observability because I got hired into managing 2 teams at 2 Cows. And for those who've been around long enough, 2 Cows is that 2 Cows, the one that gave you the free Windows software. Same 2 Cows, but it was different. They had changed their business model. They became a domain wholesaler. But one of the teams I was leading was an observability team. And I knew, kind of a bit of observability. But at that point, I'm like, well, if I'm going to lead this team, I better, educate myself properly in observability. So as I was learning, I was blogging about it. And part of my exploration involved OpenTelemetry. And at that time, this was around 2021, and OpenTelemetry was not like traces weren't even generally available. And I'm like trying to convince these people. I'm like, no, trust me, you're going to want to use OpenTelemetry. It's going to be huge. And now OpenTelemetry is the second, I think, has the second highest contributions of any project in the CNCF. So it has fulfilled fulfilled my predictions, which is super cool. So that's how I got into the CNCF space, and because like after this job managing this observability team, that was my first role as the developer advocate, and so that's when I was highly encouraged to contribute to open source, and particularly in OpenTelemetry, which has been amazing, and I haven't looked back since. Like Courtney, my first KubeCon was KubeCon Detroit. So similarly, it holds a very special place in my heart. And one of my life goals when I'd gotten into the space was like, I want to attend a KubeCon. So I got to attend a KubeCon, and so I've attended only 4 KubeCons so far: Chicago, Detroit, Amsterdam, and Paris. And they were all great, but I have to agree with Courtney. The vibe in the Europe KubeCons is the best. I thoroughly enjoyed Paris. It was so much fun. And like you said, it's kind of like the little work vacation. So, you get to explore the city, but you also get to hang out with awesome tech friends. And my first KubeCon, I was so terrified because I was like newly minted DevRel. I didn't really know anyone. There's like all these people I follow on Twitter, and I'm kind of like walking around starstruck. And now, like 2 years later, it's so cool to have made so many amazing friends in the community. And it's just absolutely been a blast. And then favorite talks, gotta agree with the majority. Kelsey Hightower delivers a really amazing talk. I saw one he gave in Amsterdam, where he was talking about like maintaining open source projects, and it was a very thoughtful talk. And it still resonates with me to this day. And I have to say, like, and he is the most approachable guy. Like, I was at his book signing in Paris, and I was wearing a mask, and it had the sticker for my podcast. And he's like, "What's geeking out?" I'm like, "It's my podcast." He's like, "I can do podcasts. If you want, I can be on your podcast." I'm like, "What?" So it was like an absolute dream come true. I'm like, bucket list item checked off right there. So like nothing but good memories from KubeCons. And CNCF projects, favorite ones, I have to say OpenTelemetry, slightly biased. Also love Argo CD because I spent so much time playing around with it. And I think it's such a fantastic project. And I love the fact that you can you deploy stuff and you can see how everything relates to each other. I love that visual aspect of it. And it's been cool to see it gain momentum in the last several years. And also one of my life goals is to score one of those super fabulous Argo t-shirts. I have yet to find one that's fitted and extra small. So if anyone knows where I can score one, please let me know.
Thanks, Adriana, for sharing these wonderful journeys. Sharing some excited journey ahead as well. And I do prefer, I do call out this Kelsey is one of the approachable person. I remember I invited him on my podcast in 2021. On that time, I have 32 subscribers on my YouTube channel. And then I ping Kelsey with my heart on my mouth, like how well he responded, but he joins in. Like it's literally is a big day for me. And that's where I realized that this community is a very great in terms of how you approach people from outside the world as well. So now I head over to Atul, because we are a part of some of the open source sandbox project in the Kubernetes space as well. And Atul has been traveling to some of the KubeCon, and he has some foodie and traveling and all these kind of extravaganza that we love to hear about. So over to you, Atul. Your exploration journey into the Kubernetes and meeting community folks around the world.
Thanks, Sam, for that introduction. And I would say that all of you are quite experts and stalwarts when it comes to community, Kubernetes, cloud native stuff. I'm relatively new, and a little bit of backdrop before I get into my contribution here. So I've been into the IT industry for about a decade now, and I've spent time doing a lot of things. I started as a manual tester, clicking on buttons of websites and checking if they are working fine, going to an Excel sheet and marking them as pass and fail. I did build websites, build mobile application, did something around Azure. And all this time I was also, writing my travel and food stories. So I'm a food and travel blogger for a couple of decades. And I do try to do some tinkering at home. I have a Raspberry Pi sitting just there, and I did write something about it. And my current employer, they stumbled upon that blog post, and they were like, "Hey, are you up for a role of a developer advocate?" And I was like, "What the hell is a developer advocate?" And they sent me a job description that what are you supposed to do as part of the role. I went through it and I was like, "Hey, this is a match made in heaven, because I get to create content which I am actually doing and I love to do, and I don't leave tech. I get to explore new tools and technologies every day." And one of the first things that happened in the interview process was, I mean, in the assignment, one of the last points which was written was brownie points if you can Dockerize this application. And until then, Docker for me was just a big blue whale. I didn't know anything about Docker apart from it being a huge blue color thing with the fish in it. So I opened YouTube and I watched Tech World with Nana. I watched a video for an hour to really understand what Docker is. Wrote a script and submitted, and yeah, that's how I landed up into this role of developer advocacy. So yeah, my journey into open source and Kubernetes literally started 3 years back. 2022 is what I would say, 21 end. And one of the first projects that I worked with was Fission, which is one of the projects that we maintain at InfraCloud. And that basically is a function as a service. It's a Lambda counterpart for Kubernetes. And that's when I had to dig through Kubernetes, actually, what CRDs are, what operators are, digging into stuff, understanding it. And then I remember one of my first applications that I built was a fork of the voting application. That's part of the Docker example. So I took it up, converted a little into Python, modified it. So technically, that was my first code commit contribution. So first code contribution to open source. It was into Fission, and then I started working on improving developer documentations around Fission, and that's when I started understanding more about the open source landscape, Kubernetes itself. And one thing led to other, and that's one thing that I absolutely love about my job is, I get to explore a lot of things at one go. So, at the same time, while I was focusing on Fission, I came across Istio. I, built few integrations with that. I worked around Kafka. I worked around some, observability projects. So I did a bunch of things in different projects, and slowly and steadily, I was connected to the larger community on Twitter, as well as LinkedIn, and kept on learning, reading tweets, going through blog posts, videos, and just figuring out my way into, trying to do things in the right way or the wrong way, but just trying to get things done. And along these same lines, same time, basically, I came to know about the ambassadorship program. I was inducted as a CNCF ambassador. That again was a big thing, which gave me access to a lot of, people like you. I I wouldn't be wrong in saying, but then it slightly makes, networking and meeting people a little easier. I think that's what I've seen in the couple of years that I've been part of this program. Me and Siam, we did work on a CNCF project called Parallels, which is a security project, Zero Trust Access. So we both were involved in getting in Sandbox. And I remember before we were, doing this, I was going through all the readmes and documentation around the various stages of projects in CNCF, because I had absolutely no idea. I was relatively a newbie in the open source, in the cloud native space. So reading about what a sandbox is, what is graduating, what is graduated, and then figuring out all the checklists to have this project sandbox. So I think that was a great experience for me. And then more recently, though, I started getting involved in platform engineering. It's about a year now, so I'm part of the platform working group, also a part of the maturity model that that was released last year around KubeCon Chicago, and got to learn a lot of things. Interestingly, getting perspective from a lot of different people, because that's the beauty of working with communities. You have a viewpoint, others have a viewpoint, and then you get to know that, hey, this thing can be done in a different way as well. So I worked on it, and fortunately, I got a chance to attend my first KubeCon, which was KubeCon Chicago. Apparently, that was also my first foreign trip from India. So I had never traveled outside of India, and that was my first trip uh, to the US, and it couldn't have been any better. And I think one of the first people whom I ran into was Courtney at Rejects, and we look at each other and we're like, "Oh my God, are you there? Are you seriously? So it was a great meeting with her, and then the next thing I know, I meet Engin and Orlin, and we just meet. I'm walking at the on a street, and you're like, hey, let's start Sig Foodies, and we they started Sig Foodies. We spoke a lot about food, obviously a lot of tech as well. Uh, and yeah, more recently, I also visited KubeCon Paris, my second KubeCon. Again, fortunate to be there. And here I was as a speaker at a panelist. So, I spoke at a panel on platform engineering uh, with a lot more other folks like Mauricio and Thomas, Leon from the working group, and also presented Parallels as a maintainer. So coming to my favorite open source projects, I think, like I said, I've dabbled with a lot of projects. I would say one of them is Istio because I love their documentation. It's so easy and straightforward to get. If a person like me can get started in a couple of minutes, it means the documentation is on point. So I really like their documentation. And then I did spend time with Fluentd, Grafana, and OpenTelemetry, along with Prometheus. So the entire data pipeline, observability pipeline, I think I enjoyed working on that as well. And lastly, about KubeCon experiences, like I said, it's only been 2 that I went to. And I'll agree to everyone, the first KubeCons are always special because you get to meet people in person. You are seeing them first time beyond Zoom screens and StreamYard. So that was a great experience. But Paris would always be my favorite KubeCon. And that because I had studied French in school growing up. And while I was studying in 6th grade, I always wanted to visit Paris someday where I could test my French. And I did that. So I went to my hotel reception, I spoke in French, and I was very happy that the receptionist understood what I said. But then when she started speaking, I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Please, now please talk in English. I don't speak French." But it was a great experience, and I think in terms of talks, like everyone said, I do prepare a list of talks to attend, but seldom it has been that I've attended all the talks that I wanted to. Since I have been involved in the platform space, more recently in Paris, I attended a talk by Abby and Liz, which was around why pigs should wear a lipstick. I think apart from the title, I was really intrigued by the whole idea of what they were trying to present. And there was also one talk, I think, in Chicago, which was around CubeRay and platform engineering, which was around the AI stuff, getting AI to platforms. So I think these are the 2 talks which I attended in person, but rest, I've gone through them via YouTube most of the time. So yeah, that's pretty much about it. Sam, thank you so much.
Thanks, Atul, for sharing your wonderful journey so far. Bunch of the chat in the comment section. Thanks, Daniel and Mustafa, for hanging out with us on the YouTube as well. So I think it's really a wonderful, and I'm predicting we can come up with some various thoughts around how people get introduced into the Kubernetes as well. But I move along with some of the conversation that's very important. What could the future of Kubernetes could hold? And I wanted to learn all of you from few thoughts on where should we make some improvement at the community and one things to improve upon. But I can share 1 minute in my journey. I work in the healthcare, and one of the things I do quite consistently is to push changes into production without testing. And that is part of my job because we have not a lot of customers, just a few healthcare, so few of the doctors. So I push changes into the production. And then I end up realizing that how large code that every time I make changes into the production piled up into the production. And they say, no, this is not a good strategy. We have to make some staging environment set up. And that's where the Docker came up. But when I actually introduced Docker internally within the company, people feel like it's a lot of learning curve behind it. So not many people are inspiring the threads. There are so much more coming into our plate. Let's forget about it. But then in few years, I think I introduced Linkerd in my company. And they do a canary rollout quite perfectly. And they love about it. I don't know why, but they love about it how we do a canary deployment with Linkerd. Then they say, oh, we should use it. And then I said, oh my God, there's a catch because this runs on Kubernetes and that I haven't introduced already in there. So then people start figuring out that there is a Kubernetes and there's an ecosystem, but we have to introduce some of the complexities bring in, and we have to trade off some of the alternative as well. But till today, there are some big concern around how the Kubernetes is evolved. Is quite complex today. A lot of startup organization finding it very hard. And one of the question I obviously find all the time, when you demo something to the Kubernetes initially, you not get pretty much attached. But when you share some functionality, it's upgrade, because a real is a zero downtime deployment, is a self-healing every organization need. So I wanted to learn from you where you think Kubernetes can make improvement into the future. What I'm realizing that everybody is cloning the Kubernetes code, but not cloning the structure that Kubernetes bring in. We have SIG team, special interest group, for various different APIs, SIG CLI, SIG APIs, and bunch of other ecosystem. I don't see a lot of the organization are making some special interest group within the company, but they wanted to use the open source project. With all of these jargon, I got over to the Kathleen to let us know, what do you think we should improve or can improve in Kubernetes in near future?
Well, first off, you mentioned companies taking things from the structure of Kubernetes. And actually, on our podcast episode that we released this week, just a couple of days ago, we do have an example of a case where a company picked up the KEP process, so the Kubernetes enhancement proposal process that we use for determining what new features will go into Kubernetes in the future. So there is an example of that there, of a company adopting a process. But yes, special interest groups, some projects, and all of that. I could explain all of that, but what was your question again? Let me come back to that.
Yes, I just wanted to learn from you. There are few areas we could improve upon. I think I just give you one example.
Sure.
There's the Ingress versus Gateway API, and me and my friend Victor Farsik is wishing everybody should forget about Ingress and start using Gateway API. But those people who are really new into the Kubernetes, they introduce with Ingress first, and they end up with a limitation of Ingress, and then they introduce to the Gateway API. So then the question game that I'm thinking around, there are some things we should improve upon in the community, either on the documentation side, either on how we portray message and put in the public. But what are the few things you think Kubernetes we should improve or can improve in near future?
So I've had a lot of conversations with folks, of course, lately about AI workloads in Kubernetes. And we have an episode on that coming out for the Kubernetes podcast next time, which will be in 2 weeks. And I think there's a lot of work that's going to go on in Kubernetes over the next couple of years, particularly for those workload types. They are incredibly well suited to the whole system that Kubernetes has built, because Kubernetes is a distributed system for getting the right hardware to the workloads that need it, and that is very important in AI. So there are a lot of improvements, I think, that will happen across the entire project of Kubernetes, kind of geared toward those types of workloads. In particular, I would call out the scheduler for batch workloads. One thing I've heard a lot about from HPC, high performance computing communities, is that they have created their own schedulers. They want to use Kubernetes for some of the infrastructure management, but the way that it determines which workload will go when and kind of how it batches workloads has some room for improvement. So I look forward to seeing how we improve that.
Thanks, Kelsey, for sharing your thought. Now I switch over to the Bill, because where there are some eBPF, Cilium stuff, and he's building out some community, some newsletter. So Bill, can you share some thought in the Kubernetes realm and some of the things that the eBPF bring into this community? What are you predict or think are changes can be introduced in the near future in the Kubernetes?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about what eBPF is bringing into Kubernetes. And I think really what we're going to see is eBPF connecting all like the Linux internal plumbing to the Kubernetes world. And so really going from things like IPs and translating those into things like Kubernetes identities. And so with eBPF, you can pull these really low-level kind of details and data and pull it into the cloud-native world, because everything's moving so quickly. It's such a dynamic environment, and being able to connect those, I think, will really help speed up what we can do in the cloud-native world, while giving us better control, better performance, and more flexibility. So kind of the combination of those two is quite exciting for me. And there's a lot of fun projects coming out, and also a lot of work going on in the Cilium ecosystem to bring those two worlds together.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Bill, for sharing your thought. Now I head over to the Adrian, because Adrian really the supply chain security, and they see some innovation happening. And Adrian, can you share some of the thoughts, especially in the Kubernetes ecosystem? We see some artifact store, OCI images, and then we wanted to make sure that all the images are compliant. And then we see OpenVax is a new document coming up in the ecosystem. So can you give us some high-level overview of where we actually are now, and what you think or predict where we are heading towards to?
Yeah, so supply chain security is like a really sort of big issue, especially given a few high-profile incidents in the past. So basically, there's some things that are very sort of simple or relatively simple that we'd like to see become more common, like everybody sign their images, for example, with SigStore. There's other things you can do, like obviously our company produces secure images with low numbers of CVEs, and one of the ways we do that is just by reducing the amount of software in our deployed containers, which is of course a strategy anybody can take. But there's also a bunch of things like Salsa. So if you look up salsa.dev, it'll give you a lot of information on how to improve the supply chain security of your systems effectively. And it defines sort of several levels that you can work towards, starting with stuff that you can do tomorrow, towards much more complicated stuff that will take probably multiple years to implement. So a whole bunch of stuff going on there, to be honest.
Thanks. Absolutely. And there is for some good excitement for all of us, but the people who are working on it, they think, oh, there is so much for us to bring into the community, and we have to deal with all these kind of complexities. So over to you, Quaternary. You work with the Monocle and now in the Test Cube, and there's a big tough conversation around, there's a lot of developer complexity in building Kubernetes. So can you give us some high-level tour or prediction of Kubernetes in the near future?
Yeah, for sure. So in my time working with the Monocle project, just very much focused on policies, and I have seen especially a movement toward the usage of pod security standards, but not a big enough movement toward that. I think it's such a great feature. It's very simple and straightforward and clear and easy to use, and so with things like eBPF making such a big security movement, hopefully people will also start to use policies more efficiently and effectively in theirs to comply with security standards, but also use the features that are already built into Kubernetes and help them get better. And then on the other side of that, there isn't really a lot built into Kubernetes to help with testing, end-to-end testing, load testing, testing of infrastructure as code, testing your applications. And testing is such a huge part of the SDLC, and incorporating that into your CI/CD pipeline is quite complex, especially in such a scaled environment. So TestCube is an open source tool that tries to help with that. But I do hope that as Kubernetes continues to mature, and so do the users, we start to get to a point where people start realizing that this is something that they should also be considering as they're either adopting Kubernetes or have now adopted and need to start looking at their actual SDLC, because this has a huge impact on developer experience, as well as your productivity and resource allocation in Kubernetes as well, cost and everything else. So those are the two things that I hope get a lot more attention, are pod security standards, that people just use them, and that there starts to be a broader focus on testing and how we can help people do that in such a scaled environment.
Yes, and I'm moving over to Ingan, can you tell us, like in the infrastructures are quite heavy these days, with particular all of the tooling and the crossplane and the open tofu. There's a bunch of stuff happening in this umbrella. How often you see some customer community are actually thinking about what they wish for Kubernetes, or are we actually heading toward their wishes?
That's a very good question. I mean, our customers or customers in this area, they treat Kubernetes, for example, as every resource also. So most of the time when they order stuff from cloud providers, they have the structure, they have the description on what to do and what to change. So from this perspective, there is no specific thing. It will be most likely about how the different providers make it more accessible, configurable for some cases. So that's something I can say on this part.
Thanks. And last few, because we actually top of the hour, might some folks have a hard stop, so I can't actually make your life more busy. So just a last few questions from Adriana and then Atul. So Adriana, you live in the observability space. So can you tell us a few of the things around this umbrella?
Yeah, so I think because I believe there was a recent-ish, like last year before release of Kubernetes that had some experimental observability features. So definitely nice to see. It would be nice to see more of that coming out of Kubernetes. I would say also, like, having worked in OpenShift first and then Kubernetes, like I definitely took for granted that OpenShift abstracted a lot of stuff, and especially around the networking side of things. And I would love to see that sort of thing integrated into Kubernetes, because let's face it, the networking stuff with Kubernetes is a pain in the butt. And even generally, like, there's like so many YAMLs that you have to create to associate, like to kind of that serve as like connective tissues, like different resources that connect each other so that you're able to do different things, like stuff around service account and RBAC and that sort of thing. And that stuff is, if you're new to Kubernetes, that can be so daunting. So wouldn't it be nice to have, language that was a little bit less complicated to express that? And I think that's one thing that, like, I worked a little bit in HashiCorp Nomad land, and that's one thing that I think HashiCorp Nomad does very well is like keeping things relatively simple. And I would love to see more of that with Kubernetes.
Yes, and just the last few verdicts from Atul on the platform engineering side, because he's quite heavily involved. Also, he did a talk on PlatformCon that I think was telecasted today. So just a few thoughts around some of the stuff there, Atul.
Sure. So I'll keep it short and sweet. I think, yeah, from the platform side, a lot of the times what happens is people keep focusing on tools, but then the talk which I gave at PlatformCon today was about, tools is just one part of it. There are a lot of things that are beyond tools. You talk about culture, you talk about stakeholders, getting approvals, implementing it, and then taking feedbacks. So these are a lot of things that happen, beyond the tools. So I think that is one area from a platform or any tooling side of things that, one could focus on. Also, like Kathleen told, with the advent of AI, everyone, coming up with Gen AI, LLMs, and XYZ, I think it's also important to see how platforms would support deployment and orchestration of such workloads, especially, when you have a GPU coming into picture and which disrupts the entire thing. Now you have a GPU memory to deal with. Now you have a networking on a GPU to deal with. So it will become pretty intricate to deal with such things. And I think one of the focus for the community should be on reducing the learning curve or the complexity in getting the AI workloads there. So yeah, those are my 2 cents. Not an expert, but that's what I feel we should be aiming probably at.
Yes, absolutely. That's the thing actually currently happening in the ecosystem. But as you know, in the Kubernetes, it's very difficult to actually take the time out. So I take 4 more minutes. So sorry for that. But thank you very much. If this is your day 1 on learning Kubernetes, these esteemed guests have to be the go-to resources, because these are one of my go-to resources if I came across some of the problem and I wanted to learn from the ecosystem. So thanks again. Thank you very much, Kathleen, for joining us in this show. And I love the work you have been doing in the community for a very long time. So keep up with all of your work in the recent things happening. So Adrian, we will try to do some of the workshop on the supply chain security, because this channel is missing some of the content for a very long time. And I think we have a test cube. Some of the workshop is be given with Maria, is available on this YouTube channel. Please watch that out as well. And Indian and me is teaming up again for some webinar, hopefully this month or next month, but this coming up. Some great stuff on the vCluster vending machine. One of the webinar is already available. Go watch that out as well. And Adriana, you have been into my, this is my first day interacting with you. So hopefully we have some collaboration in place. So Bill, Atul, it's been great. I have a lot of, I always love talking to you on the internet, and I've spent a lot of time in the last few years. Hopefully we have some collaboration going on. But with that, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. And today we'll learn the KubeCon Barcelona, KubeCon Europe vibes of the best one. And make sure if you visit some of the KubeCon places, go check out these places as well. So have a wonderful day, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep looking up in the ecosystem and all the community member around. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye. We'll meet soon.
Bye.
And happy
Bye. Thank you so much.